Hi everyone, welcome to our webcast today. Let's get started. This webinar is brought to you by the CMO Council and Nielsen. I'm today's moderator. My name is Sally Lopez. I'm the Director of Marketing, Program Management, and Operations here at the CMO Council. My featured guests today are Lana Busignani from Nielsen and Tom Kanashiga from CMO Council. Lana leads the Global Marketing Analytics practice at Nielsen. Her team is focused on helping advertisers make better decisions across their marketing investments and helping publishers demonstrate the value of their audiences and assets. Welcome, Lana.
Thank
My
you.
other guest is not really a guest, but the Chief Content Officer at the CMO Council. Before joining us here at the Council, Tom was a Senior Analyst at Forrester Research, where he covered sales and marketing technology, and he was also a writer and editor at IDG, TechTarget, Informa, and some other publications. Welcome, Tom.
Hi, Sally.
We'll be tackling a really sensitive topic today. It's about the missteps in marketing with digital advertising. These missteps were brought to light in Nielsen's recently released annual marketing report, which Lana will speak to in just a bit. A couple of the major missteps we'll be focusing on are, number one, marketers are putting most of their energy into pursuing new customers rather than nurturing existing ones. And number two, marketers making media decisions are based on perception or gut feeling, meaning they're not data-driven decisions. So to begin, Lana's going to provide an overview of the findings and an analysis of the Nielsen annual report. And then Tom's going to jump in and discuss his insights about today's upside-down buyer's journey and why it's critical for marketers to nurture brand advocates. We're going to have a frank discussion about marketing missteps and how to overcome them. And then finally, there will be time for Q&A at the end. I just want to raise that you're welcome to pose your questions at any time, and I'll keep a note to address them once we've wrapped up the presentation. So, Lana, I'm going to start by handing it over to you. I'd love for you to tell us about the findings that you uncovered in this year's report.
Sure, yeah. I'm very happy to be here to present findings from our annual CMO report. I'll jump right into some of the results we're seeing, and I'll tell you a little bit about who we spoke to and what the report is comprised of. So really, something that I think is really important to understand is what a transformational year it was last year in terms of digital and kind of a pivot point that digital has reached. For the first time, many marketers committed to spending more of their ad dollars in digital media than traditional channels. So today, digital is now capturing more than half of all U.S. ad spending. So it's really grown up, reached that point of maturity where it's now on par with traditional vehicles that we can't really say digital is small and experimental anymore. But what we wanted to explore is how marketers are perceiving the effectiveness of all new channels at their disposal because of the proliferation of new channels, and how are they navigating that space, and are those insights of how they're perceiving effectiveness driven by measurement data that they trust, and how we really wanted to explore the gap between perception and how marketers really on the ground have to make decisions every day and are making decisions every day. So we really studied, for our Nielsen marketing report, we studied the psychology of the modern marketer. We asked how they perceive the effectiveness of channels, even when ROI measurement isn't very clear, and whether this new multi-channel environment is changing how they see their role as marketers. Our research shows that marketers today are holding digital channels to a different standard than traditional channels, and the metrics are different. Even the concerns are different. So, for example, brand safety. Brand safety is something that is a real concern for marketers in the digital space, but when you're advertising on traditional media, it's not something that marketers naturally have to worry about. So the metrics are different, which causes them to evaluate on different standards. They also have different concerns depending on on-channel, traditional, and digital solutions. So we've seen a lot around the conversation of how marketers are making different decisions and holding different media to different metrics. So we do know that, the novelty factor of new things is strong, and that digital channels that are perceived to be effective invites more spending, even when we can't always verify the effectiveness of brand new channels. And so traditional channels, we're pretty clear about how we evaluate them, and so they don't benefit from that same kind of newness. Something that we see in the marketplace and in conversation is that industry forecasts for digital ad spending have painted a rosy picture, but the question is, are those investments driven by measurement data that marketers can trust? We see some high-profile CMOs from Procter & Gamble, Unilever, Adidas, and more, making comments publicly around intentions to reduce digital ad spend, citing needs for greater transparency online, and wanting more transparency around the effectiveness of digital ads. And so, and wanting that comparability. We see a real call for comparability, and I think that's what's driving this this tension around investment in digital, is that CMOs and marketers are really looking at how are we able to fairly evaluate my next dollar that I spend, how if I choose to spend it in traditional advertising or linear television, and how does that dollar compare to a decision to take that and move into digital instead. It's really that comparability that I think is causing this disconnect. Despite these vocal critics, we find that most marketers are actually growing their investments in digital, still growing them despite these challenges and these calls, to action among the high-profile marketers. So they're investing even when they don't have the ROI data behind those decisions. So we'll get into those results in a minute. The Nielsen Annual Marketing Report, just to give you a sense for what it is, we collected the data for this report from marketers contacted via newsletter and through follow-up emails. And the sample consists of 247 brand executives, 116 agency executives, for a total of 363 respondents. We have mostly representation. We have senior level marketers involved in the survey, as well as senior level agency contacts evaluating as well. It's mostly a U.S.-based study with some representation in some key media markets. So what did we learn? What did they tell us? One of the interesting findings that we found when we asked marketers around their priorities and what are their top priorities as marketers, what came up as far and away the most important priority is the acquisition of new customers. So customer acquisition coming out at 41% of marketers citing that as their top priority. This compares to a distant third, 13% listing customer retention as their top priority. And we, despite advertisers accepting this principle that a big percentage of their sales is a consequence and result of existing consumers, there is a lot of focus on customer acquisition. We know, though, that you really need a balance in terms of your approach. So this is one of the findings around an opportunity for marketers in terms of the pendulum. We believe the pendulum has swung really far toward tactical digital optimization as marketers are tackling this space, the ad tech, martech space, the digital ecosystem, and the proliferation of vehicles there, and the addressability and personalization opportunities of digital around customer acquisition. Right? So as marketers have been spending a lot of calories tackling that new space. Many traditional marketers have kind of taken their eye off the ball in terms of driving brand equity and awareness and actual reminders around the brand and retention of customers and reducing churn. So, we see this as a big opportunity in terms of returning back to that balance. And, just anecdotally, we are starting to see more questions emerging from our brand marketer clients and advertiser clients that are saying to us, hey, while we are making progress in tackling measurement and opportunity in the digital space, have we inadvertently neglected brand building activities and asking to take stock of brand equity performance and brand equity management and making an evaluation of that. So we do see that there's an opportunity there, and we're seeing some movement around anecdotally that marketers are recognizing that. But here in our survey, we see that a lot of attention being paid to customer acquisition. One other sort of point to make in this is that it becomes even more important as barriers to entry are going down. In many categories, we see challengers entering, and it's a lot easier for brands to enter the marketplace today than they have in the past. And so you can see an example of a personality like Kylie Jenner being able to launch a cosmetics brand and online that's more digitally native and an e-commerce kind of business that can rival businesses and brands that have been in this business for 100 years. And it's not only personalities that are able to do it. We see also Glossier, which is not a famous, there's not a famous person behind that, but Glossier being a challenger in the category that is completely online. So as barriers to entry go down, it becomes even more important to protect those your current clients and your current customers and make sure they're not churning and moving to new brands. We see that agencies are also prioritizing, the acquisition of new clients, and it's not a huge surprise. Agencies, partners like us, we follow the lead of our clients, and so we see that agencies are also not prioritizing reducing churn and not prioritizing advocacy and customer retention as much as building awareness and acquiring customers. In terms of digital media budgets, we asked marketers to rank the effectiveness of each of the following paid channels, and so what we saw, is that our analysts, there's some novelty that plays a role in marketers' confidence, and newer channels tend to get the benefit of the doubt, whether measurement and a channel's perspective are aligned or not. So you'll see later we ask which channels do they perceive to be easiest to measure or have metrics associated, and it's a little bit different. So what we see coming out on top is really it's paid search, it's video, and social as the top three in terms of what marketers perceive to be effective channels. And agencies follow, almost the same kind of trajectory. They're slightly more confident than their clients in general on the effectiveness of digital, but the ranking is generally the same. Okay. So here, if we look at perceived effectiveness isn't necessarily tied to their confidence in their ability to measure ROI. And so when we ask about their their ROI, how confident they're in their ability to measure ROI for each of the following paid channels. You see that more known and long channels that have more longevity, like email, search, and display, come out on top in terms of being able to have measurement associated. It's 67% of respondents are confident in their ability to measure email, followed by search, 63%, and then display. And then you see video and social coming in after that. And so, some of this is not necessarily always tied to ROI, but there are metrics that marketers are used to seeing and using. And so in the case of email, that's sort of back to the future in terms of, being able to know exactly, who you're contacting and then the actions that they take in terms of clicking through and maybe all the way to purchasing on a website. Search, again, is that really, are they measuring, feeling that they understand ROI as much as, metrics like click-through? But we see definitely a disconnect between those two metrics of perceived effectiveness and ability to measure ROI. We see in this slide that there's a difference in terms of traditional intentions around investments between traditional and digital media. So we asked marketers, how do you expect your budgets to change in the next 12 months for paid traditional media channels and for digital channels? And in the light blue bubbles, you can see intentions around digital investments, and the darker blue bubbles are intentions around traditional investments. And so you can see that there are intentions to grow digital budgets with the bubbles that are light blue larger to the right and up, especially for vehicles that are considered effective, extremely effective and effective, but even for vehicles that are only somewhat effective, that there's intention to grow investment. Whereas in the dark blue bubbles, you can see there's not a lot of intention for change or even intention to reduce, as marketers are perceiving those channels to be more saturated, and their openness to trying new vehicles and expanding investment in digital continues, even though they really are more at parity today. So we really have some takeaways in terms of how CMOs and teams, need to evolve in terms of, investments in digital and traditional, and some of their in their investment vehicles and how they're employing measurements and tactics to understand performance. And so, one element that we see is that the need for breaking down data and functional silos. Part of that disconnect that I spoke about at the beginning of the webinar around CMOs having frustration with the different metrics between digital and traditional, and having evaluation and optimization and decisions happening within silos, means that really there's less ability to make change and have a comparable, ability to make a comparable comparison across these vehicles for teams and for marketers. So really the need to break down those functional silos so that, and this is organizationally, that today marketing teams are broken up by traditional and digital vehicles, and even within digital you see the silos around a team that handles search, teams handling display and social, and that not only do those structures need to change to enable omni-channel teams that are looking across and making decisions across those options, but that flexibility needs to be built into the marketing budgets to enable that as well, so that there's an ability to shift money from a vehicle that isn't delivering or isn't working towards your objectives to vehicles that are working better for you. And so building that flexibility and fluidity in budgets is also necessary to enact change. And finally, rethinking traditional partner and agency contracts, how we are transacting media today, how we are contracting media today, and even, that our agency partners, the agency partners to marketers are mirroring the organizations of marketers. So they have the same silos and the same teams, and they need to make the same moves in terms of moving to omni-channel teams that can look across and make decisions across the ecosystem, but also, that the way we contract media and purchase media will evolve as we have learnings and the desire among advertisers to say, I need to move money from this vehicle to that vehicle. How do I do it? And if the way we buy media today prohibits that, how do we rethink those constructs and make those changes to allow that flexibility and fluidity? So those are the findings from our report. You also should have a link to be able to download the learnings from that report as well. And I'm going to turn it over to Tom to give us some perspectives from the CMO Council as well.
Great. Thanks, Lana.
Thank you so much, Lana. And Tom, before you jump in and want to get your take on these perspectives, I did get a question from folks on full screen viewing option. If you just hover over the CMO Council icon in the bottom right, you'll be able to move to full screen. So just wanted to make sure everybody can see clearly. And we'll pass it over to Tom and get his perspective.
Great. So one of the more alarming findings in the Nielsen report is that marketers favor new customers over old. If you took a closer look at that Nielsen's pie chart, you would see something that's really remarkable. Only 5% encourage advocacy as a priority. Only 5%. So I'm going to be talking about why. Pardon me. I'm going to be talking about why I think that is a big mistake. So my story begins with the customer, or rather the new B2B buyer. This new buyer changes everything, disrupts the selling motion, remakes the sales organization. So I want to talk a little bit about who this new buyer is. One of the defining characteristics is that the new buyer has a blended work-life lifestyle, meaning they blend B2C and B2B buying habits whenever they go shopping. So in B2C, for example, they usually shop anonymously by simply walking into a store. Now with B2B, they shop anonymously online. So brands may not even know who they are, and they certainly don't know what stage they're at on the buyer's journey. In B2C, consumers often change brands. In B2B, they traditionally tend to stick with a single brand. But now this new buyer is open to changing vendors. It also works the other way. The new buyer brings B2B due diligence to the B2C shopping experience. And it's this last piece that's most interesting to our conversation. The new buyer understands how to research online, how to gain knowledge quickly. They're able to look at review sites and social research, social networks. They send emails and text messages asking questions, seeking more insight. They've made online researching a critical part of their buying process. As a result, we have an empowered, self-reliant buyer who's emotionally vested, yet highly considered in their purchasing decisions. So how does this empowered buyer impact the sales motion? Here's some stats for you. So Danny Brown says 90% of buyers trust peers on social networks, even strangers, while only 15 to 18% trust brands. What this is saying is that the brands no longer control the conversation. So some of these other stats on the bottom here come from Forrester Research. 71% of B2B buyers say purchasing from a website is more convenient. 63% of B2B companies are increasing their investment in e-commerce. And what that's showing is that there's a rise in B2B e-commerce, which is really important to our story, which I'll get into a little bit later. Here's an interesting stat. 62% of B2B buyers can finalize selection criteria or vendor lists solely on digital content. That means that shows the importance of content marketing today and how content has to be informative and trustworthy. And the final stat here is in 2017, 68% of B2B buyers find going online superior to interacting with a salesperson. Now, I'm not saying that this is the death of a salesperson, but it's putting pressure on salespeople to become more consultative and more solution selling. So what this is doing is the story that's emerging from these stats is that there's something profoundly disruptive happening to the B2B buyer's journey. So before I get into what that looks like, I'm going to briefly go into the traditional buyer's journey. Now, I'm sure you all recognize this. It's really oversimplified, so I apologize for that. And I'm only including it here for context. In the left corner is the marketer who fills the top of the funnel. Not a significant role, relatively speaking. At the very top is a salesperson who thinks most marketing leads are garbage. The salesperson is the one who converts the prospects. That's why they're highly compensated. And if you notice, after conversion, the customer experience has a severe drop-off. Everything becomes a cost center. Customers having problems with products get stuck in phone trees. They're put on hold. When they finally talk to a customer service rep, the rep's KPIs to get them off the phone as quickly as possible. And this is still the buyer's journey for most companies. But now with the empowered buyer, all of this gets flipped on its head. So here is the new B2B buyer's journey. We see all the selling action and buyer decision-making happening at the front. This is where the new buyer is researching products online. The digital marketer is now in the vanguard, the sole voice of the brand in the sales conversation when it matters. The marketer is the one who sees what resonates with customers, what doesn't, learns more about the customer every day, who knows the customer better than anyone else in the company. The salesperson's role, as you can tell at the bottom here, is diminished. In many cases, they're now an expensive order taker. But the biggest difference in this new buyer's journey is what happens after conversion. If the customer is treated right, they'll be happy. They'll be emotionally connected, as I explained in the B2C, the blended B2C B2B lifestyle. And the greatest among the satisfied customers will become brand advocates here in the top right corner. These are the advocates that are proactively posting good things on social networks and review sites for prospects to read. They're defending the brand when things go wrong. The red arrow means that all of this happens on the front lines of the buyer's journey where the buying decision is taking place. Now you'll notice at the front of this journey is an e-commerce icon. I haven't talked a lot about e-commerce, but it's really important to the story. Forrester predicts B2B e-commerce will reach 1.8 trillion, or 17% of all B2B sales in the U.S. by 2023, 3 years from now. Bank of America projects there's a total addressable market for B2B e-commerce for 1.4 trillion by 2021, which is nearly double their estimated market for B2C. And of course, Amazon Business is growing incredibly fast with millions of business customers. It was launched only 5 years ago and yet hit 10 billion in sales last year. It's projected to hit 25 billion next year. What does all this mean? If you think about how products are sold in an e-commerce scenario, what's really happening? The answer is that in this new B2B buyer's journey, and especially in the e-commerce scenarios, brand advocates essentially become the company's top salespeople. So we'd like to see marketers nurturing the brand advocate community. They should be doing things like connecting with them on social media, providing continuous educational content via blogs or newsletters, recognizing them and promoting them in success stories, giving them VIP treatment like sneak peeks of product roadmaps and prioritized seating at customer events. They should be launching campaigns to re-engage advocates who aren't active anymore. So to conclude, when Nielsen says only 5% of marketers encourage advocacy as a priority, we believe they're making a big mistake. Sally?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you, Lana. I'm going to move into the Q&A portion of this presentation. So I have a few questions from the audience. The first question is just a quick question specifically to you, Lorna. Earlier in the presentation, you were talking about how marketers favor new customers over old, and that in fact agencies also prioritize new customers over old. The question is, do you believe that this also applies to retailers?
Yeah, I think that we kind of separate, sort of the various personas within retailers around, working with them as advertisers, working with them as publishers, and working with them as merchandisers, as merchants. And so in the persona of advertising, which is really, we're talking about marketing and media and advertising here, marketing investments, I think that retailers are similar in terms of, in the digital world, really focusing on customer acquisition as well, and that that there's a push for customer acquisition in the same way that because there's a lot of the battleground has gone online with convenience and that kind of sort of vying for share. I do think that there's depending on if you're coming from a brick and mortar and moving into digital, or if you're digital and then expanding to brick and mortar, because we see both models, I would say that probably brick and mortar are they're enacting a lot of programs to try to protect their base, right? To continue to keep consumers coming in, with services like click and collect and things like that, that they're really trying to protect the base so that they have that the threat of convenience and ordering online and moving, the center of store moving online. And but I think they're also trying to offer services to enable all of those things as well. So maybe they are a little bit they're a little more balanced from that standpoint, but it really depends on where you're coming from. If you're in e-commerce moving toward, having a full portfolio including brick and mortar, or if you're going from brick and mortar toward e-commerce.
Great. That's a really helpful distinction, Lorna. Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question. It seems that marketers were beginning to understand the importance of brand advocates, but your findings show that this isn't actually the case. What do you think's going on, Lorna?
Yeah, I think that brand advocacy it's a little bit different in the consumer space, right? So different from B2B, I would say. So in the consumer space, advocates and influencers, I think that there is a little bit of a question around the value that provides and the risk around it in terms of consumer brands, right? So, I think there are kind of a couple of things at play here. Number one is that in terms of that dichotomy that we see today with all of the focus on customer acquisition, that there's a lot of capability to harness in the digital world around addressable media, being able to find buyers in categories, within a category to try to acquire them from another brand, a competing brand, to your own brand. And so there's a lot of focus there today, and less of a focus on the sort of building around brand equity, around supporting brand building initiatives, which advocacy would be in that bucket. So I think the first thing is that there's just a lot of focus on harnessing the capabilities of big data and addressable media and personalization and all of that enablement to find customers in your category and find customers that are buying competitive brands and try to make attractive offers to them to come over to your team, right? So I think that's the first thing. And so, and the second, I think, is really that there is a difference between consumer advocacy and B2B advocacy that I think is one distinction between how Tom was looking at it versus the Nielsen report. because there's a lot of, B2C brands that we're looking at. And advocates and influencers, I think that they play a role. It's a matter of, how big of a role will they play in the entire marketing investments that big brands make.
Great. Tom, I'd like to get your perspective based on, what Lana just covered and what she has, found and what Nielsen has found in their research, and maybe what you've seen in your own experience.
So the reason why this is happening is marketers, in the B2B scenarios, marketers are, their KPI is lead gen, right? So they have to fill the bucket. Sales operations, sales companies, or companies' sales operations, they're very conservative. They don't like to change that particular journey that I was talking about. They don't like to bring in new sales technologies. They don't like to touch the sales structure and culture. They don't like to change the way they do sales forecasting, even though it's terribly inaccurate. It's still all about nurturing leads, courting prospects, and new sales. So that's what marketers are faced with, and that's why they're prioritizing the way that they are. But things are going to change. They'll change because of e-commerce. So my take on it is that marketers should keep a close eye on B2B e-commerce revenue at their companies, because e-commerce is going to be an inflection point for sales. Once sales organizations see the rise of B2B commerce revenue, it's going to force them to recognize that there's a new buyer, that all the sales action is happening up front, that they don't have the visibility into the buyer's journey anymore, that the old funnel is dead. The only ones at the company with the most influence are digital marketers, and they're the ones that are building the new sales force, which are the brand advocates. But until that happens, until the e-commerce pivot happens, it's kind of a wait and see for them.
Yeah, interesting. I'm gonna jump into the next question. I thought measuring performance over digital, that is online metrics, was supposed to change the game of advertising, making it more of a data-backed science. So why do you think marketers have returned to the old ways of making decisions with their gut intuition? Lana, I'm going to pass it to you first, and then we'll get Tom's thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think one element is that there's still a lot of willingness to try new things and to pilot with new vehicles, see how they are working, even in advance of proven results. And so I do think that, because of the proliferation of media and new platforms, new offerings in the marketplace, new ad vehicles, that marketers are very interested in testing out these new avenues and giving them a chance. And that, they're willing to do that in advance of clear measurement or the ability to have consistent metrics across, right? So that is one reason. I think that in addition to that, they may use different metrics than ROI itself. So what we're seeing also in the marketplace is there's a proliferation of metrics around what is an outcome that an advertiser or marketer is trying to achieve. It may not, the vehicle itself may have a different objective than driving a sale today. It may be, moving them along the funnel of awareness, top of funnel metrics down to making a purchase. And so, are they sending people to a website, effectively? That's an outcome measurement that isn't ROI, it's a different metric that they want to track. And so we see marketers tracking multiple metrics around engagement, around the path to purchase and the customer journey. So in the automotive space, are people getting online and playing with the car configurator page? And are they designing a vehicle? Are they asking for a test drive? And even, are there metrics around visitation to a dealership and using location data for that? And so there's lots of different metrics that we also see beyond ROI. I think that it's a matter of marketers just are using different metrics, and they're also wanting that comparable measurement, and they're wanting that connection of econometric models and MMM and ROI measurement with MTA and attribution solutions and digital measurements that is at the same standard of incrementality and being able to be compared to those econometric models that we've used for a very long time.
Beautiful. Tom, you want to jump in here?
Sure. I think it's a two-part answer. The first one is what Lana's talking about, metrics. Metrics by themselves are dangerous. To read into what the metrics are saying is akin to reading tea leaves. I was speaking to a marketer for a movie and television production company the other day. He was putting movie trailers on YouTube and was getting tons of views, tons of engagement, but those views didn't translate into people seeing the movie. He had to do an additional poll to try to get some qualitative data. So when it comes to metrics, he was saying correlation does not imply causation. So there's that the flood of data, but the flood of metrics, but what are they saying? The other part about it, this question here is this whole idea of data-powered decision making. And it sounds great. We've read a lot about it, but in practice, it's really difficult. And that's part of the reason is that marketers have systems that don't talk to each other, let alone to other systems in the company. Customer data is a mess. It's siloed. It's unusable. Most marketers lack the right kind of customer and market data anyway. So analytics, even though we hear about machine learning and how fast that is, analytics really takes a long time in practice at this point today. It's too long to be able to make decisions about content strategy or adjust campaigns in flight. There's a time gap between data gathering. To customer insight, to taking an action, and because everything is moving so fast, marketers really can't wait. So that's one of the reasons they rely on intuition to make decisions in the moment.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've got a few general. Oh, go ahead, Lana.
I think, Tom, a little bit more of what you're talking about is more around, marketing mix. But I see in the marketplace that marketers are asking for more speed. That many marketers have their own data and are able, and our attribution engine is a daily feed. We have daily SLAs on marketing measurement with direct integrations to programmatic bidding and buying, where our clients are optimizing daily in terms of their digital campaigns. And so I think that, there's, and as we see attribution moving at such a rapid pace, we also see the demand for marketing mix to mirror that and move at a faster pace. Where marketing mix used to be an annual exercise that was more backward looking, we are seeing much more agile mix being asked for with more frequent updates to mix that are happening on a quarterly basis and sometimes even monthly basis because of what's changing on the ground competitively. And so I see a bit more movement towards speed. Right.
I agree. I guess what we read in the press and the media, it seems to be further ahead than what reality is, but they are moving that towards closing that gap.
Yeah, thanks, Lana, for jumping back in there and providing some additional context. I think that's really helpful for our audience. And I do have a few general questions here. I just want you guys to know that I am going to answer those questions in a moment here. But the last big question here for Lana and Tom, you say marketers are willing to continue investing in a digital channel even if performance is lackluster. This sounds dangerous. What's the fallout?
Yeah, I think that what I think is happening today, what we see today is, again, what I talked about earlier, that really there's a willingness to continue to experiment, try new channels, give them a go, in the absence of, understanding measurement just yet. So with new platforms that are really hot, we see that marketers are willing to give it a try with, with Twitch, TikTok, other vehicles where there are big audiences that form and, some of those tentpole events, some of the events on the Twitch platform are bigger than some of our traditional tentpoles that we've come to know and love, bigger than the Super Bowl. So I think that they're willing to invest and try in advance of being able to necessarily measure, but also that, digital has grown up, and it is at a space where there is call for comparable measurement, and there is a call for, there is a call for the ability to compare across, and that will emerge, and especially television is becoming more digital as well. It's addressable. It's we're going to have, dynamic ad insertion becoming more common, and the ability for television acting more like digital. It will naturally come to a space where there's more ability to determine the value and worth across vehicles and be able to help marketers better make those assessments.
Yeah, I would agree with Lana here. Not too long ago, it was more of a shotgun approach, and I think marketers are starting to realize that wasn't as effective. They have to be a little more selective, not just selective in terms of their audience, but also where their audience is at any particular moment, right? So, a CEO who is if the CEO is in a digital channel on a business sense, then they would be more open to that than, say, if they're watching the Super Bowl with, their buddies or whatever. So, we are different people in different times of the day. So the channel selection and the messaging is becoming, it needs to become even further more focused.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. So I really want to thank both Tom and Lana for taking the time to share their insights with us today. I want to thank the audience for joining us. There were a few questions that were posed regarding the ability to download Nielsen's report, and there's a link to that here on this bottom slide. So it's go.nielsen.com/marketing report. Folks were also wondering if they could actually get this deck from this presentation. We will be following up via email with a link to view this on demand and with a copy of the presentation for folks. And then I know some folks were asking about Twitter profiles. CMO Council is at CMO_Council. Nielsen is at Nielsen. And Tom's personal Twitter is also his last name, so at KANESHIGE. I'll make sure that I share all of that information with you guys over email so that you have everything that you need. Please feel free to reach out to me, Sally Lopez, slopez@cmocouncil.org, with any additional follow-up questions. And we're going to end it here. So Tom, Lana, thank you again so much. Thank you so much to our audience. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity as well, Sally and Tom. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Bye, all.
Bye, everyone.